Long Bin, 1969, 3 o'clock in the morning. An American medic watches a man enter his surgical tent with shrapnel embedded so deep that white bone shines through torn muscle. Any other soldier would be screaming for morphine, crying for help, calling for their mother. But this man calmly sits, lights a cigarette with his one functional hand, and requests a beer before surgery begins. He is Australian SAS. And the medic's world will never be the same again. What follows is one of the most unsettling untold stories of the Vietnam War. A story classified by the Pentagon for decades. A story American veterans avoided mentioning until their final days. Why were U.S. medics, hardened professionals who had held dying Marines, terrified to treat wounded Australians? What occurred in those recovery wards at 3 a.m. that made nurses request transfers? What did these men do in their sleep that defied all medical explanation? And why did the Vietcong call them jungle ghosts? A monster from ancient Vietnamese folklore. The answers will reshape everything understood about special operations. The human mind under extreme military conditioning. What men can become when they cross the boundaries civilization set centuries ago. Classified reports, deathbed confessions. Medical files never intended for public eyes. Remain with me until the end, because what the Australian SAS brought back from those jungles persists. And the screams that haunted American hospitals have never truly ceased. Field Hospital at Long Bin experienced a terror unlike any other. That February night in 1969, Sergeant Thomas Riley had seen hundreds of wounded soldiers pass through his surgical tent. He had held dying Marines. Stitched wounds no textbook prepared him for, but nothing. Nothing could prepare him for the man who entered at 03:00 hours. The Australian did not scream. That was Riley's first observation. The man bore shrapnel across his left side, fragments so deep that white bone was visible. Any American soldier with such injuries would howl, beg for morphine, call for their mother, yet this man simply sat on the nearest cot, lit a cigarette with his one working hand, and asked for a beer before surgery. Riley's hands trembled as he approached. He had heard rumors about these Australians from the Special Air Service Regiment. Whispers in the halls, stories that sounded like battlefield legend. But what he saw that night was only the first sign of something far more terrifying. The Australian Special Air Service Regiment arrived in Vietnam in 1964, a full year before the major American buildup. They came quietly, without media fanfare, 55 men. Phantoms who would redefine what the United States military believed about counterinsurgency warfare. Pentagon planners barely noticed. Australia was a loyal ally contributing forces under the ANZUS Treaty. Their SAS considered auxiliary, useful for militia training or reconnaissance. American commanders assumed they would follow U.S. tactical doctrine. They assumed wrong, catastrophically, historically wrong. And Washington had no inkling of their miscalculation. The first Australian SAS patrols in Phuoc Tuy province lasted 72 hours. American long-range reconnaissance rarely exceeded 48 hours. The Australians returned with intelligence that stunned MACV headquarters. Mapped supply routes Americans had sought for 6 months. Located enemy base camps invisible from the air. Achieved all this without firing a shot, calling air support, or leaving a trace. American liaison officers demanded explanations. How did 55 men achieve what 3 divisions could not? The Australians' response became legendary. Their commanding officer reportedly said 4 words. We hunt, you fight. The distinction would become everything. But Americans had yet to comprehend what hunting truly meant. Philosophical gap between American and Australian combat doctrine cannot be overstated. 1965 American doctrine relied on overwhelming firepower. Aggressive search and destroy missions. Body count as the metric of success. Suspected enemy in a grid square meant artillery. A village harboring Vietcong sympathizers faced clearance with hundreds of troops. Gunships and ordnance to flatten it, Australians observed with respect and private horror. They understood the logic, but recognized that every massive operation created 10 new enemies for each eliminated. Insurgency math worked against firepower with merciless accuracy. Australian SAS inverted assumptions, where Americans brought numbers. Australians brought four-man patrols, where Americans cleared territory. Australians inhabited it. Americans counted bodies. Australians counted dismantled intelligence networks. Interdicted supply routes removed enemy commanders surgically. Leaving no witnesses, the injuries arriving at American hospitals told a story missing from after-action reports. Medics noticed patterns. Australian SAS casualties responded differently. Not in wounds, shrapnel is universal. But in reaction, this was not stoicism, not cultural performance. Physiological monitoring confirmed reduced stress markers, even in unconscious patients. Heart rates remained steady, blood pressure stable. Surgeon Corporal William Riss documented this in classified reports, later declassified in 2003. He suspected drug use, ran toxicology on 17 Australian SAS patients over 14 months. Every screen negative, whatever allowed them to endure, was not chemical. It was something else, and it was about to reveal itself horrifyingly. Ameritics requested transfers away from shifts coinciding with Australian arrivals. Officially for workload, unofficially whispered ghost stories. Australians unnerved them in ways they could not articulate. Something in their eyes, their silence, their detached observation of surgery on their own flesh. The discomfort spread beyond operating tables. The SAS base at Nui Dat, 8 kilometers from Vung Tau, separated from other units by more than barbed wire. Americans reported an unquantifiable wrongness. Quieter than any barracks, men moved like flowing predators even at rest. Conversations halted for outsiders. Not with hostile silence, but patient evaluation. Sergeant Major Franklin Rhodes's Green Beret, attached in 1968, recorded observing a briefing. No maps, no photos, no intelligence packets. A senior Australian spoke for 45 minutes about startled monitor lizard sounds. Sunlight angles through canopy, smell, repeated emphasis on smell. Enemy soldiers' rations, he felt like a hunting lodge. Not a combat briefing, they were planning a stalk. The prey-human roads requested reassignment 3 weeks early. Paperwork cited logistics, letters revealed fear. Australians were professional, courteous, skilled, but methods suggested crossing ethical lines they no longer recognized. The Vietcong had already named them. Captured documents 1967 referred to Marung. Standing instructions avoided Australian contact unless 10-to-1 numerical advantage and confirmed escape. Direct translation: jungle ghost, forest phantom, Vietnamese folklore. Enemy used myth to describe SAS. American medics rarely spoke. Confidentiality, discretion. Decades later, oral histories revealed a pattern. Australians screamed, not in treatment, not surgery, but in sleep. Navy Corpsman Michael Delocqua. Veterans History Project, 2009. Recovery Ward, Cam Bay. August 1968. 3 SAS evacuated. First night uneventful. Second night chanting in sleep. Rhythmic, not English or Vietnamese. Third man eyes open. Mechanical tracking. Lips move silently in cadence. 12 minutes. Then silence, mourning, no memory. Third night horror. The most wounded began screaming 0330. Not pain, pure rage. 11 minutes without breath. Needle bent against tensed arm. Orderlies thrown back. Others' lips moved silently in cadence. Monitors normal, then collapse. Vital signs normalized. By morning requested discharge to return to unit. Staff stunned. Commanding officer only said jungle changed them. What they brought back lived inside. Screams were just expression. Staff, Sergeant Raymond Carver, MACVS, classified SOG operator. Attached November 1967. 11-day joint mission. First 3 days educational. Australians moved fluently. Subtle hand signals, read jungle-like text. Day 4 discovered supply cache. Americans would call airstrike. Australians observed 10 days. Did not move. Did not rotate guards. Revealed logistical network. Carver doubted sanity. Hunger and thirst disappeared. Day 10 Australians struck without firearms. Enemy unaware. Returned to Nui Dat. Carver requested transfer. Refused explanation. Recordings later 1992. Concluded they were no longer soldiers. Jungle had entered them. They became hunters. Australian SAS inherited British SAS traditions, but developed uniquely Australian traits. Many operators' rural backgrounds, hunting survival, intuitive tracking, navigation from childhood, Aboriginal knowledge integrated, not as token, as instructors, legendary tracking skills, taught reading jungle floor, created operators processing combat environments, absent in American doctrine. They did not search, they felt birds, insects. Silence indicated presence. Vietcong consistently bewildered. Struck from impossible angles, vanished before detection. Aboriginal instructors brought conceptual frameworks of violence. Hunter and prey as relationship, reverence, ritualized combat. Engagements treated as ceremony most controversial. Body display. Reports 1966 unusual enemy casualties positioned deliberately. Trail junctions, suspended, discovered by enemy. Initially attributed to South Vietnamese atrocities, revealed SAS responsible. Unofficial accounts describe psychological warfare. Each arrangement a message, north-facing, hands positions, dawn versus dusk. Morale collapse, desertion, Americans disturbed. Not violence, but meaning. Body conveyed intent. Soldiers experienced religious-like understanding, first confessional since childhood. Why medics feared Australians. Wounded SAS cooperated fully, answered questions, followed instructions. But during recovery, something triggered, watched, active, evaluative, predatory. Americans felt assessed, categorized, prey without knowing. Australians altered medical facility atmosphere instinctively. Nurse Lieutenant Sarah Morrison, 12th Evacuation Hospital, 1968, trained not to flinch, Australian sergeant. Abdominal surgery, vitals checked, eyes fixed on entry point, trajectory anticipated. Hands shook, reassigned, could not explain. Polite, nothing wrong. Primal recognition of predator and prey. Understood being tracked. Understood why prey sometimes waits for teeth. Regimental culture. Cultivated effects deliberately. Trained reflexive patterns emerged automatically. Stalking nurses and orderlies not choice, but instinct. After war, SAS reintegration rates puzzled psychologists. American veterans high PTSD. Nightmares. Flashbacks. Australians fewer. Different. Not unscathed, but transformed. Altered threat assessment. Startle response. Relationship to violence permanently changed. Always watching. Always evaluating. Always ready. American medics sensed difference instinctively. Recognized prey instincts. Pentagon 1968. Disturbed by SAS performance. Success too high. Enemy casualty ratios 50-1. Own casualties negligible. Intelligence exceeded all Allied reconnaissance. Investigation 6 months. Observation. Interviews. Analysis. February 1969 report classified top secret. Conclusion. SAS methods could not be replicated. Not secret, but required psychological transformation forbidden by American ethics. Knowledge better left unacquired. Americans abandoned study early 1969. War continued 6 more years. Australians continued effectiveness. Americans higher casualties lessons. Some paths to effectiveness demand transformation civilization cannot afford. Some weapons cost more than victory. Medics understood instinctively. Trembling hands, racing hearts, recognized predator presence. Not malice required. Screaming was voice of predator. Sleeping throats spoke language predating human speech. Language of hunt, of stalk, of mong. Jungle silent, something worse than darkness moving. Americans understood. Australians remembered. Screams were a reminder. Predators do not sleep fully. Old men in Australia carry jungle inside. Predator transition still triggers. Do not speak, but flicker behind eyes reveals something ancient, something hungry. Learned to hunt in Phui province, never stopped. American medics knew. Transformation irreversible. Hmong, jungle ghosts, earned name in blood and silence. Americans understood why Vietcong used folklore. Monsters are what humans become when they remember what they were before civilization. Australian SAS remembered, and screams never ceased.